17 days. That is all the time it took to go from a crowned and anointed Queen of England, the woman a king tore his country from Rome to marry, to a body in an unmarked chest beneath the floor of a Tower chapel. 17 days from her arrest to the blade. And here is the part that should unsettle you. This was not a murder done in the dark. No poison, no smothered scream, no hired knife in a corridor. Anne Boleyn was killed in daylight, with judges, with juries, with sworn testimony and the full grinding machinery of English law. Everything was done correctly. Everything was legal. That is what makes it terrifying. To understand how fast she fell, you have to understand how high she had climbed. Anne Boleyn came back to England from the French court in the 1520s, sharp, fashionable, unlike anyone else at Henry VIII's court. The king became obsessed, not for a season, for years. He pursued her, and when the Pope would not annul his first marriage to Catherine of Aragon, Henry broke England away from the Church of Rome to have her. He made himself head of a new Church of England. He remade a nation around this one woman. In 1533, she was crowned. That September, she gave him a child. A daughter, Elizabeth. Not the son the whole gamble had been for. And that is the quiet engine of this entire story. Anne's power did not rest on the crown on her head. It rested on a single promise, that she would give Henry a living male heir. As long as that promise held, she was untouchable. The moment it failed, she was a problem with a solution. By the start of 1536, the promise was failing. In January, Catherine of Aragon died, and within days, Anne miscarried, a child that observers at the time said appeared to be a boy. Think about what Catherine's death changed. While Catherine lived, setting Anne aside was dangerous. With Catherine gone, Henry was free. He could be rid of Anne and take a new wife, and no one could question that the new marriage was the only true one. And he already had someone in mind, one of Anne's own ladies-in-waiting. Quiet, mild, the opposite of Anne in every way, Jane Seymour. Anne Boleyn had become expendable. All that remained was the mechanism. The mechanism had a name, Thomas Cromwell, the king's chief minister, the most capable administrator in England, and the very man who had helped engineer Anne's rise. Now he would engineer her fall. A word of honesty here, because this channel does not pretend to certainty it doesn't have. Historians still argue about Cromwell's exact role, whether he acted on Henry's direct order or moved first himself against a queen who had become his rival. The historian Eric Ives, who wrote The Standard Life of Anne, saw a deliberate, constructed plot. Others read it differently. What the record does show is that in the spring of 1536, the machinery of the state turned toward the Queen with remarkable speed. On the 24th of April, a special legal commission was quietly created, an instrument to investigate and try the gravest crimes fast. The frame was built before anyone had been charged. 6 days later, the first arrest, not a nobleman, a musician. Mark Smeaton was a court musician, low-born, with no powerful family to protect him, and therefore the easiest man at court to break. He was taken to Cromwell's own house, and there he confessed to adultery with the Queen. That confession became the cornerstone of the entire case. It is also the single most doubtful piece of it. Smeaton was the only one of the accused who ever admitted guilt, and it was widely suspected then and now that his confession was forced, perhaps under torture in a private house, with no record of how. Hold on to that. The foundation stone of a case that would kill 6 people was a confession from the one man with the least power to refuse. The 1st of May, the May Day jousts at Greenwich, the court at play, and in the middle of the festivities, the king abruptly stood and left, taking with him Sir Henry Norris, one of his most trusted gentlemen, questioning him as they rode. By the end of it, Norris was under arrest. What had Norris done? Days earlier, Anne had quarrelled with him, a careless, dangerous exchange in which she accused him of looking for dead men's shoes, of imagining that, if the king were to die, he might marry her himself. Idle court talk, the kind of thing said and forgotten 100 times, but to even imagine the king's death was treason, and in the frame Cromwell had built, careless words became a capital crime. The 2nd of May, Anne was summoned, accused, and taken downriver to the Tower of London by barge. Within days, more arrests, Sir Francis Weston, William Brereton, and most monstrously of all her own brother, George Boleyn. The charge against him was incest. The charges, when they were laid out, were staggering in scale: adultery with 5 men, incest with her brother, and conspiracy that she and her lovers had plotted together to kill the king. One thing the charges did not include, despite a legend you may have heard: witchcraft. Anne is often imagined as accused of bewitching Henry. She was not. That is a later embellishment, not part of the formal indictment, and on this channel we keep the two apart. On the 12th of May, the 4 commoners, Norris, Brereton, Weston, and Smeaton, were tried at Westminster Hall. The verdict was guilty, and note who said what: only Smeaton, the broken musician, pleaded guilty. Norris, Weston, and Brereton denied it to the end. 3 days later, Anne and her brother were tried inside the Tower, before a panel of their peers, some 2,000 people watching. Presiding over the court was Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk, Anne's own uncle. She defended herself with a composure that struck everyone who saw it. She answered every charge and denied every one. And here is where the case falls apart under its own weight. Years later, historians did something the court never bothered to do. They checked the specific dates the indictment claimed these crimes took place against where Anne actually was. Eric Ives showed that on several of those dates, the alleged meetings were simply impossible. She was recovering from childbirth, or traveling with the king, or somewhere else entirely. The case had not been built to be true. It had been built to be unanswerable. It didn't matter. The verdict was guilty, and it had been guilty before she ever entered the room. On the 17th of May, the 5 men died on Tower Hill under the axe. It was not clean. By some accounts, severing George Boleyn's head took more than 1 stroke. That same day, a few miles away, Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, a man who had privately written to the king of his own doubts about Anne's guilt, declared that Henry and Anne's marriage had never been valid at all. Sit with the logic of that. The marriage was annulled, declared never to have existed, 2 days before Anne was beheaded for betraying it. You cannot commit adultery against a marriage that was never real. The case had just contradicted itself in broad daylight, and still no one stopped. The 19th of May, 1536. Anne Boleyn was led to a scaffold within the Tower walls, and here Henry extended what passed in him for mercy. Rather than the clumsy English axe he had sent for and paid for at a cost of around £23, an expert swordsman brought all the way from Calais. Her final speech was careful, conventional, and gave nothing away. She praised the king. She asked for prayers. It was the expected form, and she had a daughter still living, whose safety depended on her mother's restraint to the very last. Then the swordsman, 1 stroke. Her body was put into a chest and buried beneath the floor of the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. 11 days later, Henry married Jane Seymour. So what does the record actually support? A confession, most likely forced from the weakest man in the room, charges listing crimes on dates when they could not have happened, a jury and judges chosen for the outcome they would deliver, and a marriage dissolved days before the wife was executed for breaking it. Most historians who have studied it closely, Eric Ives foremost among them, alongside Alison Weir's account of these final weeks, conclude that the charges were fabricated, a political execution dressed in the robes of justice. But this channel owes you the honest caveat. Not every historian agrees. G.W. Bernard has argued that Anne may have been guilty of something. The surviving documents, many written by hostile witnesses, like the imperial ambassador Chapais, who never liked her, don't let us prove her innocence beyond all doubt. What they let us prove is narrower and in a way darker, that the process was rigged, that whatever the truth was, the trial was never designed to find it. And that is the real horror of Anne Boleyn. It isn't that a king murdered his wife. Kings had done that before. It's that he did it legally, that the law itself, the courts, the commissions, the sworn juries, could be picked up, turned around, and aimed at a single person. And once you have seen the law do that to a Queen of England in 17 days, you understand the thing this whole court was built on. No one was ever safe, not even at the very top, where the throne met the block. The man who built the machine that killed Anne Boleyn was Thomas Cromwell. 4 years later, that same machine would turn and come for him. That's the next case. If you want to sit with us by candlelight for it, subscribe. The court has no shortage of bodies.